Thanks for joining us for Guess Who in 2, where I'm going to try and give you as much information as I possibly can about a mystery artist in 2 minutes or less. Kind of like a game show without the prize money and cheering crowds. But if I could give you prize money, I would. Instead, you'll learn something fascinating, I promise. Let's get started, shall we? Today's artist was an Italian Renaissance man who grew up drawing sketches of birds and other animals, birds in particular. He was particularly fascinated by flight, something that was reflected in his notebooks for the rest of his life. His father wasn't quite sure what he should be when he grew up, but one day he found those sketches, realized he had a genius on his hands, brought them to the most famous artist of the day, Verrocchio. This master also instantly recognized the genius and took him on as a young apprentice. Legend goes that our young artist in training painted an angel so amazingly in his master's work, The Baptism of Christ, that Mr. V threw down his paintbrushes and swore he'd never paint again because he could never do as well as our mystery artist had done. At the very least, he never did finish that painting. After he left his training, our artist's body of work is rather small, with some of his lesser known works being the first one he signed, The Annunciation, where you can clearly see how he had studied the birds of wings. Look at those angels' wings. They look real. They're 3D. They're solid. Why didn't he create more paintings if he was so brilliant? Well, that's because he was the very essence of a Renaissance man. His extensive notebooks, which he often wrote in code, meaning backwards, explain his intense interest in science and his many inventions, such as the tank. In fact, when funds were tight, despite his hatred of war, he actually worked as a military engineer. Even when he was painting, he experimented with materials, leading to the deterioration of the incredibly famous The Last Supper. And speaking of The Last Supper, fun story. It's said that the convent's prior complained that our artist was taking way too long, that he would come and merely paint 6 brushstrokes or so and then leave. How is it ever going to get done? Our artist responded saying he just couldn't visualize the face of Judas to make him look evil enough to have done what he did. But if the prior couldn't wait any longer, he'd just paint the prior in as Judas. He was also an architect and sculptor as well, but unfortunately none of those works have survived. Supposedly a large statue he was creating of a man on horseback was actually used as target practice by invading French soldiers. You'd think the French would know better. And this portrait is most commonly considered to be a self-portrait of the artist as an older man, a short time before his death. And speaking of portraits, we'd be remiss to not mention his most famous, one of the most famous paintings of all time, the Mona Lisa. Who is the woman? Why is she smiling? Or is she even smiling? Oh, and of course, if he were a Ninja Turtle, he would wear blue and wield a sword.
Katana.
What's that?
It's a katana.
Oh, my husband says it's actually a katana. Sword, katana. Anyway, have you guessed? Do you know who our artist is? Can we get a drum roll? That's it, Leonardo da Vinci. Thank you for joining us. I hope you learned something interesting today, and I hope you'll join us for my next video, The Best of the Best by Leonardo da Vinci, where you'll learn about 5 of his most impressive works of art. And then hop on over to my other video, where I'll give you some ideas of art projects you can do, or your kids can do, inspired by our artist, Leonardo da Vinci. Thanks, and keep being creative.